let's talk about Mr. Blinken's visit to China and what happened there. So here he is. He's coming down. There he is, arriving in Beijing. Here we've got Blinken meeting with a host of Chinese officials, right? So he met with Wang Yi, who's the head of the foreign ministry, and he also met with Xi Jinping, the president of the People's Republic. Here he is. That's Blinken walking along with them, and doing all of the photos, etc., etc. Right, and then here he is. He finally meets the president.
Good afternoon. 主席好，很高兴见到你。
Which, by the way, is rare. You have to understand that Blinken is the Secretary of State. He's not the president, right? He's not the president of the U.S. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. Rare is perhaps not the right word, but it's not protocol that you have a Secretary of State visiting and meeting with the president all the time. Yes, it happens, but my point here is that the fact that Xi Jinping met with Blinken in the first place, you know, it's a huge honor, and it's something that carries weight with it, because he's not entitled to that. You understand what I'm saying, right? It's logical that he would meet with his counterpart, but he's not the president of the United States. So, yeah, let me read this to you. This is from Reuters. You can see here that Xi Jinping received him at the Great Hall of the People, which is a grand venue usually reserved for greeting heads of state. Okay, keep that in mind. So now we come to the issue of negotiations. What were they talking about? Well, the first thing that they wanted to discuss here were resuming military-to-military communication channels. So, you know, you can think of this as like a red phone. If you know your Cold War history, right? It's like a hotline between the Russians and Americans. No, the Chinese, they didn't want to hear any of it, right? So the Americans, they want to have a line of communication between the U.S. military, the U.S. armed forces, and the Chinese armed forces, but the Chinese are saying no, right? Why are they saying no? Because of sanctions, okay? So the Chinese cited U.S. sanctions as the obstacle that they must negotiate before they resume military-to-military communication channels. Now, to be fair, it is a good thing to have that. Why? Because, you know, a few weeks ago, there was this Chinese ship that cut in front of an American ship and a Canadian ship, right? And my fear is that you would have some hotheads who would use that or something like this, right? They would blow it out of proportion and then use it as an excuse to start a war with the Chinese. So to avoid that, you need to have something like this, just so you make sure the Americans don't get up to any tricks. Why do I say this? Well, because you can look at the Gulf of Tonkin as one incident, right? Which was also blown out of proportion and made up and cooked up to start the Vietnam War. So the Chinese, on the other hand, they have every right to say, hey, we're not going to give you this thing that you want because you need to lift the sanctions. There's so many sanctions on China that are absolutely ridiculous, you know? And here, look at the second sentence. So the two sides appeared entrenched in their positions over everything from Taiwan to trade, including U.S. actions towards China's chip industry, human rights, and Russia's war against Ukraine, right? Well, thank God the white man came all the way from Washington to lecture the Chinese on human rights, right? Let me play you this clip from Blinken, because he said something quite interesting about Taiwan. Take a look.
On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences.
Right, so you have a lot of people saying, oh my God, well, the U.S. is changing its position now, and why are they saying they don't want to support Taiwan? No, there's a caveat, right? There's an asterisk on Blinken's sentence, because afterwards, when they were asking the U.S. government about this, they reiterated that, well, they will defend Taiwan if China invades. Which again, try to wrap your mind around this. China views Taiwan as part of China, and Blinken, and this is not something new, but for decades, the United States say Taiwan is part of China, right? That's the one China policy. But the United States arms Taiwan. Nancy Pelosi goes and visits Taiwan, which caused a lot of trouble, right? The House Speaker going and visiting Taiwan. What the hell is she doing there? She should be going to Beijing. What's she going to Taiwan like it's some separate country, right? And then at the same time, they're saying, well, if China invades Taiwan, what do you mean China invades Taiwan? I thought you just said it's the same country. Try to make sense out of this salad, this word salad from the Americans, right? Try to make sense of it. I'll tell you why they do this, because they want to have some kind of wild card that they can use anytime they want against the Chinese, and Taiwan is only one of them. A lot of people tend to over focus on Taiwan and think like, oh, the war is going to happen because Taiwan, maybe, yeah. But keep in mind, you have Taiwan, you've got Hong Kong, you've got Tibet, you've got the Uyghurs and the Xinjiang province. These are Muslims, because that the West care about, because they love Muslims so much. That's why they kill so many of them, right? So these are 4 different issues that the West can use at any time to start cooking up a story with the Chinese, right? And let me show you here what Blinken was saying as well.
I also specifically raised wrongfully detained U.S. citizens and those facing exit bans. There is no higher priority for me than the safety and well-being of U.S. citizens overseas, and I'll continue to work intensively to secure their release and their safe return home. As we work to address our differences.
So he's saying that he's concerned about people that are wrongfully detained. Oh boy. So let me explain this to you. You have 3 Americans, right? This is one of them. Mark Sweden. These are the Americans that Blinken is referring to that are wrongfully detained in China, right? So he says Mark Sweden, and then there's also down here David Lin, okay, and then also Kai Li, okay. Now, I find this weird, because who started this habit of wrongfully detaining people, right? I mean, okay, we can go back a few centuries if you want. Yes, you have people that have always been wrongfully detained. I'm talking about in this day and age, today. Who started this habit? Who opened Pandora's box? Who opened this can of worms? It's like the Americans. They go and build, 800 military bases around the world. 800. 800. And then, before you know it, the Russians want a military base in Sudan, and they already did. They want to upgrade their base in Syria. They already did, right? But that's another story. The one in Syria has been there for a long time. But now the Russians want one in Sudan because they feel threatened by these 800 military bases, and perhaps they're right to feel threatened. Now the Chinese want a base in the Solomon Islands because they feel threatened by AUKUS and by Australia, which is another American base. Right? So now the Americans, because they're going around and doing this and antagonizing Russia and China, which are the other big powers, they basically trigger a process where the other countries start mimicking their behavior. Here, the same thing. The Americans, what did they do with Huawei? I already told you about the sanctions and all these things. But they tried to basically kidnap, in so many words, the CFO, the chief financial officer of Huawei. I mean, I don't know if people can understand, if I can stress enough how insane that is. Can you imagine the CFO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg? Like, can you imagine China trying to kidnap her? Now, they do it as an extradition. We all know what extraditions are. I'm a specialist in extraditions. This is kidnapping, right? What they were doing here. So you remember in Canada, basically the Americans through Canada, they cooked up charges against her, right? So they could unseal an indictment. said, oh, she's guilty of this and this and that. And because she's in Canada, you guys have to hold her for us and send her our way so she can be judged. Let me read to you the second sentence of this article. So after they released her, right, she had to make some ridiculous plea deal. But take a look. Within hours of the news of the deal, 2 Canadians who were arrested shortly after Meng was taken into custody. Meng is the CFO of Huawei, okay? Meng Wanzhou. So within hours of the news of the deal, 2 Canadians who were arrested shortly after Meng was taken into custody in December 2018 were released from Chinese jails and on their way back to Canada. Beijing had denied that their arrests were linked. Well, Beijing can deny all they want. That's a lie, because their arrests are definitely linked, right? This is the Chinese position. They're saying you want to kidnap the CFO of one of our biggest companies, one of our most successful companies, and send her to the United States against her will. Okay, fine. We're going to kidnap 2 Canadian citizens, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of them was put on death row, right? Sentenced to death. And as you noted in the sentence, these arrests happened immediately after Meng was arrested in Canada. And then magically, once the Canadians released the CFO of Huawei, Beijing also released the 2 Canadians. Tit for tat. Fuck around and find out. There are many ways of saying this, right? Tit for tat. But this is not nice. This is not a nice world to live in when these things happen, right? But this is the world the Americans are creating. Because of their behavior, first of all, they make the Canadians do the same thing, right? They make the Canadians do their dirty work for them. And now they trigger a process where the Chinese start behaving like them. Circling back to what Blinken is saying today in Beijing, I find it very hard to believe that he has no higher priority than these 3 Americans who are wrongfully detained. If you actually want to stop that, then stop behaving like this. Keep in mind, there is no need to even go into the details of this, because this is politics, right? It's not about individual cases. This is behavior that the Americans have caused to happen in Russia, right? Where you have this journalist detained, or these 3 Americans in China. This is because of the United States opening Pandora's box, opening this can of worms. Because you behave like this, and you're supposedly, the leader in human rights, and the world's #1 democracy and the biggest economy, blah 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 blah. You want to be the unipole, right? You want to be the the unipolar hegemon, the hyperpower, whatever goddamn term you want to use for the United States. Then whatever you do is going to impact the rest of the world, because people look to you and see what you're doing and how you interact with them, and then they mimic that. If you care about Americans being wrongfully detained in Russia, remember Brittany Griner, and Trevor Reed, the Marine. So you guys remember the first swap, and this happened last year during the war in Ukraine, which is astonishing because, even the Americans and Russians can do diplomacy during this war. Good, very good. But you had Yeroshenko, who's traded for Trevor Reed, right? The U.S. Marine. And then you have people in the media, the Western media, who accuse the Chinese and the Russians of wrongfully detaining or arresting people to use as bargaining chips. Yeah, okay, but bargaining chips against what? Other people who are wrongfully detained in the U.S.? Then maybe that's what's going on. You see, the thing is, though, that when we talk about Yeroshenko, when we talk about Victor Bout, the difference between them and Trevor Reed and Brittany Griner is that they actually served over a decade in prison each. Brittany Griner and Trevor Reed didn't. And again, that doesn't mean that they didn't go through their own ordeals. They certainly did. But you have to understand here that this is once again another element of this behavior. The United States starts extraditing people, arresting them, slapping false charges on them, and pretty much soon enough you're going to have the Russians doing the same thing, or the Chinese doing the same thing, and that's not a nice world to live in, right? So if you're looking for a guilty party, look no further than the behavior of the DOJ and the State Department and so on. And this goes back multiple White Houses. In case you thought this is it's about Biden. No, they're all doing this. They're all doing this. Every administration. So I know people are focusing on the Taiwan aspect of Blinken's speech. There are many things here. Let me play you this other clip here. He did an interview just after the other one that I showed you. Actually, wait, before I continue, wait. Look at this. Do you see the flags behind him? They look pretty wrinkled, right? So it turns out that they were so wrinkled that they were trying to iron the flags before he went on. Look at them. They're desperately like holding the flags trying to iron. It's so funny. I don't know. I mean, I get why they're doing it, and it's good they're doing it, but it just looks so funny to me. I don't know who the hell posted this. They said it was, what did they say? A fitting conclusion to Blinken's visit to China. That's good. But before I conclude, let me play this clip.
Trying to put a stop to it.
Did you get any commitment on those 3 wrongfully detained Americans?
We have a commitment to continue to work hard on resolving these cases. And for me, that's right up there.
From the Chinese government?
Yes. From me, that is job number 1 when it comes to looking out for the security and the safety of Americans abroad, and notably those who are being
Is it really?
Arbitrarily detained.
Mm-hmm. Mark Swedan's health in particular is
it really? Let me end on a positive note, and I mean this truly. I'm not being sarcastic or something. I will leave my British humor for a few moments. I do think it's good that he visited, because this is the first visit in 5 years by U.S. Secretary of State to China. 5 years. That's a long time, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and no one's looking to Hillary Clinton as an example, by no means, but nevertheless, she visited China how many times? 5, 6, 7 times? Something like that? At least 5 times. Definitely 5 times at least. And you know, obviously she's looking out for her own interests. I was going to say America's interests, but she's Hillary Clinton, so how far can we go? She's looking out for her own interests and so on, you know. We'll say America's interests, fine. But look at the difference, right? So it's good to have diplomacy. It's good that Blinken is going there, because this could be a lot worse. And as I've said many times to you guys, the situation between the United States and China is not good. It's very bad. I mean, I don't really remember the last time it was this bad. Maybe I wasn't alive. I don't know. But it's really, really bad. The sanctions, you know, I've gone into this many times before, but I'll say it again because it warrants repeating. The sanctions they put on Huawei, you know, and these Chinese tech companies under the guise of national security is a farce. This is farcical, and it's laughable because, you know, Google, Apple, Yahoo, Microsoft, all of these companies are caught spying. They're caught with their pants down when the NSA Snowden leaks came out. All of them, every single one, AOL, they're all I mean, no one uses AOL, but you know, they're all operating with the National Security Agency, spying on people, mass bulk surveillance. So if anyone is going to, you know, if we should look at anyone and criticize anyone for you know, any tech company for national security, it's the American companies. I'm sure the Chinese have their share. I definitely don't think it's that bad. But this is a lie, and it's a ruse because they are jealous of the success of Chinese companies, right? Now, HTC, this is a couple of years back. This is another Asian company that was doing very well. Perhaps you guys remember a lot of people with HTC phones. So that was an Asian company that did spectacularly well. But now focusing on the Chinese companies, you know, when it comes to Huawei, when it comes to TikTok, which is owned by ByteDance, dude, #1 app on the App Store. You got everybody using TikTok. I think most people in their teens and 20s use TikTok. You know, it's one of the most successful apps in ever. And Huawei are selling like crazy. They don't like that. That's not good for Silicon Valley and big tech. So just so you understand the motives behind the sanctions. But again, I wanted to end on a positive note. It's good to see this. It's good to see that the Chinese and Americans are you know, they're engaging in dialogue, and hopefully it gets better because I know Blinken said one China policy and so on, but you have to apply it. You have to apply it and not send, you know, military warships, destroyers, you know, through the Taiwan Strait. This is provocative. And I know Blinken mentioned this plane separate from the ship. There was an incident with Chinese and American planes, you know, being too close. Hold on a second. What do you mean too close? I think the American plane has gone too far. right? I think the American and Canadian ships have strayed too far. What the hell are you doing in the Taiwan Strait? Are Chinese warships allowed to go up to the Florida Keys? Are they allowed to cruise past San Francisco and California? Are they allowed to go? Are they even allowed near Hawaii? I think the United States would go mental and nuclear. They would go ballistic. No pun intended, right? So let's respect the Chinese, back off, and give them their space. It's really that simple. But let's end on a positive note, and I hope they can actually dialogue in such a frank and candid manner and respect each other instead of pursuing this course that we have right now, which is looking a lot like the situation with Russia and Ukraine. No one wants that with China, because this will end very, very badly. Hopefully, I really mean this. I hope they find a good diplomatic solution, and that this is not, because you make no mistake, this whole situation here, there's a lot of two-face going on. Yeah, there's a lot of two-face going on, but I mean it genuinely. Hopefully, they can get something constructive done. That would be good for everybody.